The Royal Guard had never broken protocol in 12 years of service until that night at the airport. He stepped in front of a baby stroller, refusing to let the mother pass. At first, everyone thought he was overstepping his duty, but when officers lifted the blanket, what they found underneath sent airport security running now. Before we reveal the full story, press that subscribe button and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Now let's get into it. He wasn't stationed in a war zone. He wasn't chasing down suspects. He was just standing still like he always did at Heathrow Terminal 5. But that's exactly what made Corporal Edward Hale so dangerous. It was the uniform, the stillness, the presence. 15 years in the household division had taught Hale what most civilians never understand. True power isn't about movement, it's about restraint. Every morning he performed the same ritual, 40 minutes polishing his boots until they reflected like obsidian mirrors, precisely positioning. Each brass button on his scarlet tunic aligning the white cross belt with mathematical precision. The bearskin cap, weighing nearly 2 alib, had left a permanent ridge across his forehead, a physical reminder of the burden he'd chosen to bear his fellow. Guards called him the ghost behind closed doors, not because he was pale or silent, but because he could stand so perfectly still for so long that travelers would walk right past him, then jump when they finally noticed his presence. 8 hours on the Palace Mall without a twitch, 6 hours in the rain outside Westminster without seeking shelter. His record was 11 hours during the Queen's Platinum Jubilee, not a single unauthorized movement, despite the crowds pressing against the barriers to most. Travelers passing through the arrivals hall, he looked like any other ceremonial detail, the kind tourists pointed at or took selfies with. But Hale wasn't stationed there for photo ops. He was part of a quiet joint security program between the household, Division and Border Force, an unadvertised partnership meant to catch things. Ordinary eyes might miss his post that morning. Was simple stand watch outside Customs Lane. See eyes open, mouth shut. Judgment sharp, he didn't speak. He didn't blink much. And he didn't move until that stroller rolled past the woman pushing. It was trying hard not to look rushed. But Hale noticed anyway. Her stride was too measured, her smile too fixed, and her grip on the handle white-knuckled, not motherly possessive. The stroller itself was spotless navy blue with cream accents, the kind of designer piece new mothers posted on Instagram, but something about the way the blanket sat didn't make sense. Hale had seen hundreds of strollers roll by. This one didn't move, right? The baby wasn't shifting, wriggling, reacting to the crowd. The weight was wrong, the shape was wrong, and most of all, the woman was avoiding his gaze with the intensity of someone terrified of being seen. So when the stroller's wheel clipped, the side of a luggage cart, and jerked awkwardly, Hale's body reacted before his mind. Did he step forward, breaking stillness with such speed it startled everyone nearby? One hand caught the stroller before it tipped, the other lifted the blanket. Time slowed in that moment, the way it always did for him during critical points of awareness. The sounds of the terminal seemed to fade, replaced by the steady rhythm of his own heartbeat. 3 beats. That's all he allowed himself. His fingertips registered textures in precise sequence. First the cashmere softness of the baby blanket, then the cool plastic edge of the stroller padding, and finally where his fingertips brushed beneath the sleeping child. The unmistakable hardness of metal, and the roughness of duct tape. His training kicked in behind his impassive expression. His mind methodically cataloged a dozen observations in less than 2 seconds, the absence of condensation on the metal recently placed, the slight discoloration. On the duct tape applied in haste, the careful way the weapon had been positioned to avoid disturbing the child. He didn't say a word, he just looked, and what he saw wedged beneath the infant was not a toy or formula or even contraband smuggled. From overseas it was cold, it was metal, it was loaded, and in that instant every passenger in Lane C heard the sharp command of his voice for the first and only time that day: evacuate this area. Now within seconds, the sleepy murmur of early morning. Customs broke into sharp chaos. The woman mid-30s, dark hair pulled tight under a rain-slick hood, tried to snatch the stroller back, panic cracking through her carefully rehearsed composure. "It's just a baby," she shouted. "What are you doing, but Corporal?" Hale was already moving armed item under a child, he said crisply, into the small comm clipped behind his left ear. Lane C stroller unit initiate. Lockdown around him. The Heathrow protocol machinery roared to life. Airport police emerged from near. Invisible posts, ropes fell. Glass doors sealed. An automated voice began echoing through the terminal security protocol. "Is now in effect. Please remain calm and follow officer instructions." The baby, still swaddled and half asleep, began to cry. Hale stepped back from the stroller as two Border Force officers rushed in to secure it. He kept his eyes locked on the woman. Her entire posture had changed. Gone was the polished traveler with a polite smile. What remained was feral panic. She turned. To bolt, Hale didn't run. He didn't need to. Two plain-clothed security agents intercepted her before she'd taken 5 steps. She screamed once, a raw sound, not rage but desperation, and then dropped to her knees. "Don't take him," she sobbed as one officer carefully pulled her hands behind her back. "Please, you don't understand." Behind her, one of the responding inspectors carefully reached into the stroller and lifted the bundle tucked beneath the sleeping infant. A Glock 17. No serial number, full magazine, duct-taped flat against the padding. The handle barely visible beneath the folds of the child's onesie. The room went deathly still. One of the onlooking travelers, a businessman in a pinstriped suit, broke the silence. What kind of monster hides a weapon under a baby? But Hale didn't answer. He was watching the woman, not with disgust or anger, but something harder to define, something closer to recognition, because it wasn't just what she was carrying, it was how she reacted when it was discovered. Not fury. Fear. "Get that baby out of here," one of the officers said, gesturing to the attending paramedic who had just arrived on scene. The child, unharmed but flushed and distressed, was transferred gently to a waiting cot. The woman didn't resist. The handcuffs, she just wept. Hale remained silent as the chaos unfolded around him, but deep inside something had shifted. He'd spent years reading body language, crowd behavior, threat indicators, bluffers, and real bad actors, and this one, didn't feel like a trafficker or a terrorist or a smuggler. This felt like someone who'd run out of places to hide. Corporal Hale didn't return to post. Not immediately, at least. Instead, he stood in the debriefing room off Terminal 5, arms folded. Across his crimson tunic, the towering bear skin hat still firmly in place around him, Heathrow's security brass buzzed like hornets shuffling paperwork, rerunning CCTV, contacting embassy liaison. But no one interrupted him. They didn't have to. Hale had already filed his statement, and it was a spare and precise, as his bearing, suspicious behavior, body posture inconsistent with standard maternal stress subjects, evasive movement, near unformed personnel intervention initiated at 0842, your guard. Caught what 3 scanners and 2 behavioral analysts missed. A counterterrorism liaison muttered as he skimmed the report. That's not luck, that's eerie. But Hale wasn't listening to praise. He was thinking about her face, that sharp pivot from panic to collapse, that scream, not like someone caught in a crime, but someone cornered by something worse. He'd seen it before. Kandahar 2010, his squad was sweeping through a bombed-out compound after a suspected Taliban retreat. There was a woman there, veiled, clutching a child so tightly her knuckles had bled. Everyone assumed she was shielding a suicide vest. They shouted in PTO, got no response guns. Were raised protocol, demanded split-second certainty. But Hale hadn't moved. Something in her eyes had stilled him. She wasn't hiding an explosive. She was hiding from a man who'd beaten her, left her to die when she failed to deliver a warning. She wasn't shielding the child. She was shielding herself from being taken back. It was Hale who stopped the others from firing. Hale who moved first, slowly, who knelt, who disarmed the situation without a single bullet that woman had been seeking. Escape, not destruction. That lesson never left him. And now, here it was again. Repeating through the steel and glass of London's busiest terminal. He watched through the interrogation room's one-way glass as the woman sat crumpled in her chair. Her wrists were no longer cuffed, but her body was still locked in a defensive curl, one arm folded instinctively over where her child had been. He couldn't hear her words, but he didn't need to. He knew. Those hands. Knew that protective hunch, knew the way people look when they've committed the crime of desperation, not of evil. A border officer passed behind him, shaking his head. How the hell did she get that gun through Seoul's security, let alone ours? Hale answered softly, people who've survived. Controlling men learn how to hide things in plain sight. The officer gave him a sideways glance. You think this was what a battered mother running from someone worse? Hale didn't reply because he didn't need to think he knew, and if there was one thing he'd learned in all his years standing still for the world to pass him by, it was this. Sometimes the ones who break the rules are the ones who were broken first. The child was safe, and that was the most important thing. Medical staff had confirmed the boy was unharmed, frightened, dehydrated, but untouched by the loaded weapon that had been nestled beneath his stroller cushion. A pediatric nurse from the airport's trauma unit held him, now gently rocking him in a sterile side room as security personnel milled about outside. But the woman, her name was Amira Khan, was unraveling in a very different room the moment she'd been separated from her child. Her composure collapsed. Gone. Was the tight-lipped defiance she'd clung to during the initial questioning gone? Was the brittle calm all that remained? Was exhaustion, the kind that wrapped around her like cold water, dragging her down faster than she could breathe? Corporal Hale stood outside the room, arms once again folded over his tunic. He watched through the one-way glass as a senior investigator from the National Counterterrorism Policing Unit tried to coax a full statement out of her. She's still claiming she had no intention to use it, a junior MI5 liaison asked. Arms crossed, skeptical. She's not lying, Hale said. The agent gave him a look. You a trained profiler now, Corporal? No, Hale replied evenly. I've just stood long enough to know when someone's standing on the edge. He could see it in the way Amir curled her arms across her stomach, in the way her knees twisted slightly inward. Defensive postures of someone prepared to be struck. She flinched when male officers entered the room, even if they kept their voices low. It wasn't the behavior of a militant. It was the behavior of someone who'd been conditioned to brace for impact. She said the father's a private security consultant. The officer added, American names not showing on any active watch lists, but she claims he had contacts that warned him before restraining orders were filed. Interpol's digging Hale said nothing. He already knew. The truth didn't always show up in a database. Sometimes it showed up in a stroller. Sometimes it cried. And sometimes it came out only when the world stopped long enough to listen. She's still claiming the weapon was hers, the liaison asked again. She didn't say that. Hale corrected. She said it was his, and she took it, so he couldn't. The agent looked at him, measuring. You believe her? Hale's voice was quiet. I believe the stroller was the only place she trusted he wouldn't look. There was a pause. The kind that usually happened when someone realized they were in the presence of something heavier than they'd expected. Why do women always get caught at the end of these stories? The agent muttered. Always them with the baby. Always them taking the fall because men like him never push the pram, Hale said. And with that, he turned back to the window and watched a mother try to find the strength to speak for the first time in years. The interview room wasn't built for comfort. Bare walls, a metal table bolted to the floor, and a single flickering light that buzzed just loud enough to make silence feel oppressive. Amir sat across from two investigators, DSI Corwin from Counterterrorism. Command and D. Farah Rahman, brought in specifically to manage trauma-sensitive interviews. Rahman had a gentler presence, but even she couldn't coax more than a few whispered answers out of a mirror. I wasn't smuggling, she murmured. I wasn't going to use it. I swear I just... I didn't know where else to hide it. And why carry a loaded Glock beneath your child? DSI Corwin asked. Not unkindly, but firmly. You understand how that reads to us, don't you? Amira looked down at her hands clasped so tightly. Her knuckles had turned white because he would never look there, she whispered. He never changed a nappy, never packed a bag. If he stopped me at Heathrow, I knew he wouldn't search there. Raman leaned forward slightly. He threatened to intercept you. Amira nodded. Once he said, if I ever ran again, he'd get me before I made it to immigration. Said he had people who'd let him know. The second I landed, the restraining order just paper. He has friends in private security, some ex-military, some worse. Why not leave the gun behind? A pause, then quietly, because if I ever saw him again and he tried to take my son, I needed something, just in case the law failed me again. Her eyes glistened, but no tears fell. The crying had passed. What was left was the ache of someone who'd prepared herself for the worst and expected no rescue. Corwin stood motioning Rahman out into the hall. Hale, still stationed quietly outside the room, watched them through the one-way glass. She's not lying. Rahman said everything in her body language backs her up. She's not defensive, she's not rehearsed. She's just tired. Her documents were altered. Birth certificate, travel, itinerary, flight, origin. Corwin hesitated, but that all checks out with desperation. Not espionage. Rahman folded her arms. You've read the medical record from South Korea, the bruising, the CT scan on her wrist, the old fracture that was never treated. The boy had bruises too, Corwin said quietly. Small ones, nothing conclusive. They're conclusive enough. Rahman counted 3 hospital visits in 18 months, all explained away as falling accidents. The pediatrician's notes flagged concerns twice. Corwin shuffled through the hastily compiled file pages of unrelated documents connected by a mother's desperate flight. Her ex-husband has diplomatic connections, former Marine turned private contractor, 3 restraining orders filed in different countries, all mysteriously dropped. Before court dates, she tried to work through the system. Rahman said the empathy in her voice was tempered by something harder recognition, perhaps Seoul police report from last year. She's quoted saying she felt watched constantly, that he told her how many times she'd gone to the park that week, what grocery store she'd visited, details he couldn't have known from a different continent, stalking by proxy. Corwin murmured, or money in the right pockets. Rahman suggested diplomatic immunity adjacent. Not quite untouchable, but close enough to make her feel powerless. She's a survivor. Corwin admitted no. Rahman corrected, she's still in it. Hale stepped forward. Will the child be separated? No, Rahman said quickly. Safeguarding team is placing them in temporary care until the Home Office reviews asylum status, but there's no custody intervention. Not yet, Hale nodded slowly, and the man Corwin sighed. Interpol's flagged his travel history. Last known location was Vancouver 3 days ago. If he's trying to intercept her, he's late but not far. Hale said under his breath. The officer looked at him curiously. You always this invested? Not usually, Hale replied, but I've seen too many stories end with the wrong person in cuffs. He glanced back through the glass. And this time I think she finally picked the right gate. The sun had already begun to fade behind Terminal 4. By the time Lance Corporal Edward Hale was finally dismissed from his post, the incident report had been typed up. Statements given chain of command informed the woman Amira remained in, holding her child asleep in the arms of a child protection officer in the adjacent room, but Hale couldn't bring himself to leave. Instead, he stood alone at the edge of the tarmac facing observation glass, his bare skin hat tucked under one arm, the scarlet of his tunic star with sweat from the long shift. He hadn't spoken much after the debrief. What could he say that he'd acted on instinct, that the moment Amir passed him, his gut told him something was off? Not just with her, but with the silence around her. Guards weren't trained for this kind of thing, not technically. They were trained for ceremonial precision security presence, the unflinching stillness that served as deterrent more than force. But Harland had drilled something else into him when they'd done anti-terror rotation together. At Tower Hill, if something feels wrong, Harland had said, "You don't wait for someone with more rank to make the call. You are the call." That stuck with him. It had been the difference between action and tragedy more than once. And today, it had turned protocol into protection. Behind him, a soft voice approached Corporal Hale. He turned. Amamira stood in a gray borrowed jumper hair, loosely tied back, her child now nestled against her shoulder under a faded airline blanket. A female officer hovered nearby, watching over the visit, but granting them a moment. "I asked to see you before they moved me," she said. "They said it wasn't allowed. But then someone, your captain, I think, said you'd earned the decision." Hale said nothing. Just stood at attention, not formally, but respectfully. Amir glanced down at her baby, who shifted slightly, then back up. "I just wanted to say thank you. You could have seen me as a threat. You could have let them take him. You could have let the stroller roll by." "I couldn't," Hale replied. "You looked back twice. You weren't watching your path. You were watching the exits." Her eyebrows lifted faintly. "That's how you knew that. And you clutched the handle, like it was the only thing keeping you grounded." He paused, which I suppose it was Amira's eyes welled. "You don't know how many times I've prayed someone would just see what was happening. Not just the cover story, not the lies I had to tell, but the fear. I've seen that fear before." Hale said softly, "In wives, children, a few soldiers too proud to admit they were running from home." She nodded. "Well, you stopped me, but in the best way possible," he gave a subtle nod. "You did the brave part. I just paid attention." Amamira looked like she wanted to say more, but instead, she held his gaze and whispered, "You were the first person in 3 years who didn't look through me." And then quietly she left. Hale stood alone again, but this time it didn't feel like silence. Back in the customs control room, the report had already made its way up. The chain, not just the standard paperwork, but the informal whispers, the kind that spread between duty stations and across agencies faster than official emails ever could. Royal Guard intercepted a concealed weapon under a child in a stroller. It didn't take long before someone tagged it as one of the most unusual security alerts of the year. Corporal Hale sat at the metal table in the supervisor's office, still in full dress. His bare skin sat beside him, brim darkened by the sweat from hours on post. Across from him, Senior Officer Calvert finished rereading the incident file. "You've put me in a bit of a bind, Hale," Calvert said without malice, just weariness. "Technically, you weren't supposed to engage." "She passed through the security funnel, sir," Hale replied calmly, "but not through the ceremonial perimeter my orders were to observe and hold. I held." "Then I acted." "Acted as what exactly? You're not CBP? You're not Heathrow's staff?" "No, sir, I'm a guard." He said it evenly. "I represent the crown, not the cameras. And I wasn't about to watch a child sit over a loaded weapon on my watch, no matter the jurisdiction." Calvert didn't respond immediately. He flipped the file closed and leaned back in his chair, exhaling through his nose. "You know, the Chinese delegation was here 2 weeks ago. Their military attaché asked why we had statues at our terminals. I told him statues don't fill out incident reports." Hale didn't smile, but something in his shoulders eased. Calvert stood, walked to the cabinet, and returned with a file marked red stripe. "Civilian interaction noted." He set it down on the desk. "This is unofficial. Accommodation without ceremony. No press. No interviews, no glory, wouldn't want any." "Sir." Calvert gave a dry nod. Didn't think so. He reached for his mug, then paused. "There's something else. Customs tracked the serial number that Glock was flagged in. A joint terror watch database last year. Potential interstate trafficker. Amira's story checks out, and thanks to the footage, they're going to press charges against her. Ex-possession, intent, threats, and conspiracy." Hale blinked slowly. "So she's free. She's in protective custody now. They'll get her to safety." Hale stood. He picked up his bare skin and tucked it under his arm with quiet precision. "Then we've done our job." Calvert offered a final nod. Not bad for a man whose job was to stand still and look solemn. The older officer paused, then reached into his desk and pulled out a sealed evidence bag. Inside was a small, tattered stuffed rabbit, its fur matted and one ear partially torn. "The boy's been asking for this. It was caught in the stroller mechanism during the security sweep cleared. Now he slid it across the table. Thought you might want to be the one to return it." Hale's fingers closed around the bag. "Does he have a name, sir?" "The child. Theo Calbert," said Theodore Kahn, 4 years old. Something in Hale's face softened, barely perceptible, but there he nodded once. 20 minutes later, Hale stood outside a small playroom in the family services wing. Through the observation window, he could see a mirror sitting cross-legged. On a padded mat, watching as her son stacked plastic blocks with intense concentration, a social worker sat nearby taking notes but maintaining a respectful distance. Theo looked up and saw Hale through the glass. For a moment, the boy stared at the red uniform with wide-eyed wonder, then broke into an unexpected smile. Hale entered silently and knelt down, his movements deliberately slow and gentle. With formal precision, he extended the stuffed rabbit. "I believe this belongs to you, young man," he said softly. Theo reached out and clutched the rabbit to his chest, burying his face in its worn fabric. Amira's eyes filled with tears. "His name is Hopper," she whispered. "He's had him since he was born." Hay nodded, a loyal companion. "The only constant in his life," Amira said, her voice barely audible. Hale stood to leave, but paused at the door. "You're both under Crown protection now," he said simply. "Remember that outside the airport hummed, as it always did, flights arriving families." Reunited suitcases wheeling over slick tile, Hale stepped back into position near the archway. Once again, just a ceremonial fixture in the eyes of most travelers, but today he wasn't standing there for tradition. He was standing there because someone, somewhere, was still watching, still calculating escape, still rolling a stroller toward a gate, hoping no one was paying attention and he would be... Would you have spotted the danger just by watching a mother push a stroller through the terminal? And if it were your post, would you have stepped forward knowing you weren't supposed to let us know in the comments? We read every single one. If this story gave you a deeper respect for the discipline and instinct behind the Royal Guard's uniform, hit that like button. It helps more than you know. And make sure you're subscribed with the bell icon turned on, because we upload stories like this every single day. Share this video with someone who thinks Royal Guards are just for show. Let them see what it really means to stand watch. Even in silence, our other Royal Guard stories are appearing on your screen. Now check those out next, and we'll see you tomorrow. Same time with another story that proves it's not about moving fast. It's about knowing exactly when not to move at all.